Our elders are fair game, it would seem, for an aberrant faction of our society.
Why would this young reporter bind her hands and feet and wander city streets as an 80-year-old? What does it mean to age in our society? Do we all go through the same physical and mental stages as we grow older? Maturing and aging, this time on Discovering Psychology. From birth to death, we all pass through many stages. But until fairly recently, most important theorists who influenced the study of psychological development focused primarily on early life. They believed that after adolescence, the psyche was basically set, with only a few important changes left to come. It wasn't until the 1950s that research on aging really began, with research on the various stages of adulthood starting shortly after. Since then, a great many myths about growing older and maturing have been overturned. One of the most valuable concepts emerging from psychological research is that of lifespan development. The idea that many aspects of human nature continue to develop throughout the entire life cycle. In this context, development isn't the same as growth. It includes both growing up and winding down. As we come to the end of our life, for example, there's what we call biological senescing, growing older physically, but also the possibility of psychological adolescing, growing up and developing psychologically to our full potential. Erik Erikson of Harvard University helped redirect developmental psychology toward the entire life cycle. His insights into the crises of identity came out of his own experiences as a newcomer to the United States.
Because as an immigrant, I faced one of those very important redefinitions that a man has to make who lost his language, all the references on the basis of which his language, his concepts and so on, his sensory and sensual impressions were based.
Erikson identified 8 stages of psychosocial development, from birth to late adulthood, in which the individual is challenged by specific crises or conflicts. Each stage is defined by a developmental task. The individual must come to terms with 2 opposite demands, balancing or integrating them. For the young adult, the conflict is between isolation and intimacy, the ability to make a full commitment to another person. This requires accepting responsibilities and giving up some privacy and independence. Failure to resolve this developmental crisis can lead to isolation, to a lack of meaningful psychological connections with other people. Research indicates that anything which isolates us from sources of social support can leave us at risk for a number of physical and mental problems.
Hi, Doreen.
The next crisis and opportunity for growth comes during the 30s and 40s. During midlife, people usually move beyond the focus on self to wider commitments, to family, work, and society. But for those who haven't resolved the earlier crises of identity and intimacy, there may loom ahead what's known as the midlife crisis. People in a midlife crisis are self-indulgent. They want to give up their commitments for one last fling, opting for freedom, or its illusion, at the expense of security and responsibility to others. Erikson's 8th and final crisis comes at the end of the life course. If an individual has resolved the crises of earlier stages, he or she can look back without regrets to enjoy a sense of wholeness. But when there are too many crises unresolved, too many aspirations unfulfilled, the end is shadowed by futility, despair, and anger. At Yale University, Daniel Levinson has also been studying the life course as a sequence of developmental periods.
I have proposed the following idea of the life cycle, I believe that it is divided into a series of eras, each lasting about 20 or 25 years. The first era is childhood. It goes until around 20. It includes what is ordinarily called childhood and adolescence. The second era I call early adulthood, which goes from around 20 to the early 40s. This is the time in which we are working to establish a place for ourselves as adults in society, forming a work for ourselves, forming a family, raising our children, advancing toward youthful goals. The third era I call middle adulthood, which goes from roughly the early 40s to the early 60s. This is a time in which we become more senior members of the adult world. The fourth era I call late adulthood, which goes from roughly the early 60s to the early 80s. Somewhere in our 60s, we begin moving out of the center stage of society. We're no longer having major responsibilities. We feel less obligated to do the kind of work we did earlier. We have the possibility of enjoying life more, being more playful. We also have the hazard of becoming irrelevant. So as I see it, the study of life structure development and a sense of developmental periods provides a context within which we can look at more specific problems such as work and family and leisure and religion and politics and so on. It doesn't fully explain any one of these, but it helps us to see their meaning more clearly and also helps us to interrelate them.